Welcome to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Bill Bender, and we are in the middle of the home stretch for most leagues. There's one more week to go before the fantasy football playoffs. And yes, I am talking about playoffs already.
Yeah, and this is a week you hear a lot of people on the questions we get where they need a win this week. They got to win to get in. So if your fantasy playoffs start in week 14, essentially week 13 can be a playoff win or get in type week. And I've got a couple of those situations in my league. So you got to try to win this week, but you also got to keep that little eye on the fantasy playoffs and a couple guys moving forward.
I imagine that for a lot of you who maybe sits in 6 or something like that, and you're just hoping to get into the playoffs, that it's almost like the Game 7 of a baseball playoff series where you say, you know what, all of your relief pitchers, you guys are available. All my starters, you guys are available. You might pitch today. In the sense that you might drop someone who's completely useless to you, seemingly completely useless to you this week, that you might have an idea of using in order to gain someone this week that you could use, especially in light of the injuries that happened this past week. And I'm thinking specifically of Frank Gore going out. If you're a Frank Gore owner and you're going into this week in the playoffs, you've got to be hoping you have a high waiver pit so you can get Westbrook.
Yeah, and Frank Gore's a guy that he goes down, and I'm in that situation. I'll give you an example for a waiver claim that you might want to do. Like Michael Crabtree's on my roster, but he's my 4th or 5th receiver, and I haven't really used him the last 3 weeks. So I would be willing to drop him and try to pick up Westbrook. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get that waiver claim in because everybody's going to want Westbrook. But that's the type of situation we're talking about.
I mean, I would say that Westbrook, or rather I should say Crabtree, has a very favorable playoff schedule, fantasy football playoff schedule, but you have to get there first. And if he's the odd one out where you say to yourself, you know what, in order to win this week, I need to make a waiver pickup, and I'm trying to decide who I'm going to drop. If you can't use him this week, you may as well drop him.
Right. And Westbrook, there's a guy that everybody's going to be really excited about, but the only caution there is they got Green Bay this week. So if you're counting on them this week, Green Bay's got a really good run defense, aside from what Michael Turner did to them last week. The 49ers passing game still is very pedestrian. It was last night. The Cardinals made them look better than they are. The Cardinals are awful. So, but you look at Seattle, San Diego, St. Louis in the fantasy playoffs. So a guy like Westbrook could help you. And I remember a couple years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, Westbrook was huge in the fantasy playoffs. So if you can get him, get him. But just be a little wary of him this week.
Well, the classic example of the guy who won fantasy championships across the land several years ago Ron Dane. That's who it was, who was with the Houston Texans at the time. Week 16, goes up against the Indianapolis Colts and scores 3 touchdowns. Colts had been a horrific defending the run that year. I mean, Dane was fantasy irrelevant for almost the entire season until that game when he had the starting job and he was going up against a terrible team. You might want to try to make your evaluations and look forward if you're in that position where you can afford to kind of look forward like that. Who are some other guys besides Westbrook that you might be looking at picking up if you're one of those Gore people or one of those Gore owners, or if you're another owner looking to shore up a part on your roster?
Well, at this point in the season, everybody's looking for that next. It could be like Ron Dane, but we call it the next Jamal Charles, the next Jerome Harrison, the guy that was getting 200 yards in the fantasy playoffs last year. I don't think there's a guy out there that does that this year, but there's some guys out there that you might want to keep an eye on. And at the top of my list right now is Tashard Choice for Dallas. I've always thought, the last 2 years, I thought he was the best running back on that team anyway. And he's finally going to get some chances with Marion Barber out. Dallas's fantasy playoff schedule features the Colts, Redskins, Raiders. Those teams rank 26th or lower in run defense. So if Tashard Choice can even get a little more than half those carries from Felix Jones, I think he's going to be a go-to flex, maybe RB2 in the fantasy playoffs.
I mean, he's one of those interesting guys that whenever he's played, it always seems like he's showing flashes of excellence, and yet he had the 2 established guys in front of him. Are there any other guys that would be names that even the most casual fantasy player would know?
Well, I think the guys that are coming back and are seeing more carries. 2 guys I like going in here. I like Joseph Adai once he gets back in action and proves that the shoulder's okay. The Colts need him. Their running game is abysmal. Donald Brown doesn't get it done. Javaris James is hurt. And even Mike Hart's a little dinged up. That offense needs Joseph Adai, and he's a guy that can get in the end zone once he's back. Brandon Jacobs is another one. He averages 5.1 yards per carry. Anytime I see a running back average more than 5 yards a carry, no matter how big or how small, that's a guy I like in the fantasy playoffs. Plus, when they get those cold weather games against the Eagles and Packers late, But yeah, that's the Jamal Charles thing. He averages more than 5 yards a carry. Every time he touches the ball, something good happens.
And all us Jamal Charles owners despise Todd Haley for that. But, okay, so now let's say we're lower in the waiver order, priority order, and we need to throw a Hail Mary and just try to get somebody who can give us anything, something, throwing it way, like just hoping against hope for someone. Is there anyone that's way under the radar that you might be able to recommend for all those of us who are desperately seeking just anyone who might be able to help?
Well, I think there's 2 long shots, and they could be something, could be nothing type guys that I might take a chance on. And I think one is James Davis for the Redskins. Owners were looking at him when he was with the Browns before he had that preseason injury. They thought he might be the guy there. And now he's in Mike Shanahan. We know he gives unknowns a chance. He gave a guy named Terrell Davis a chance. So yeah, I don't know.
Anderson.
James Davis, Terrell Davis. I'm not saying making that leap, but I will say that he could get a chance down the stretch for Washington, especially with their season going down the tubes. Another guy is Green Bay's James Starks. With Dimitri Nance out, Green Bay can't run the ball. That was proven against the Falcons. That's why they lost, and they need to find a running game if they're going to be successful in the playoffs. Maybe Mike McCarthy gives James Starks a chance the next couple weeks against the Niners and the Lions, 2 games they should win. And even though the guy hasn't played since his junior year of college, maybe something happens there. It did with Ryan Grant.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
well, Bill, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
I appreciate it.